What a difference a few weeks can make. In the last video, things were a little slow around the wildlife homestead, but recently the warm weather moving through has brought in more species, and there's so many new sightings I want to share with you. Let's start with what showed up on the trail cameras. Last time we had a snowshoe hare, a red fox, and a moose. Those were the only 3 clips we had in over a month, which was a little bit lower than I expected. But some of our recent observations have definitely made up for it. I'll start with a few of the more common sightings and work our way to the rarer ones. At the moment, there's a 3-way tie between the most common animals. The first is the red fox. We've had many more sightings recently, especially since I involuntarily put this camera right on one of the trees they've been scent marking, which they come to check out every time they pass through. I also finally saw my first one a few days ago. This one was just vibing in the warm sun. It was +5 that day, which felt like summer after a cold winter. It found a nice spot in the open to take a late morning nap. Not a bad sighting considering I was filming everything from my living room. Apparently the red foxes had a successful litter under our neighbor's porch a few years ago, so I'll have to see if I can find their den this spring. The second most common species we had was the snowshoe hare. We got much better footage this time around. You can actually see the large hind feet that allows them to easily travel on the snow. I definitely want to manage the property to have more snowshoe hare habitat, not only to benefit the hares, but also to benefit their predators. So many species out here rely on hare populations, and one of those species we actually got on the trail camera, which I'll share a little bit later when we get to the rarer sightings. For now, we'll move on to the third most common species, which is the raccoon. They've been traveling all over the property the past few weeks. Every day it seemed the cameras were getting more and more sightings, and it was only a matter of time before they discovered the forest feeders. I'll likely be taking down these forest feeders once spring rolls around. Over the next few years, the goal is to plant as many native wildflowers, shrubs, and trees to give the wildlife all the food they need, and I especially don't want to habituate the deer, moose, and bear to the feeders once they start moving through, but for the time being, the raccoons can enjoy the last of the seeds. Moving on to some of the rare sightings we've had recently, the first is a quick clip of an American mink. I apologize for the Bigfoot video quality here, this is all the camera got. We also got this clip of a flying squirrel though, and growing up they were one of the species that really got me into wildlife, so I'm thrilled to see our first one here. I wanted to find out which parts of the property they were using so I could set up nest boxes for them, so I put a bit of homemade suet out in different patches of forest, and after a few days we got lucky at one of the spots. This flying squirrel's visited 5 nights so far, so I'll likely set up a nest box nearby. But this area also gave us our most interesting sighting, and that's this beautiful fisher. Fishers are fascinating predators in these northern forests. Not only do they feed on squirrels and hares, but they're also the most successful species at hunting porcupines. Don't look it up, it's kind of gruesome. But before moving here, I was hoping we'd have them on the property, and to actually see one roaming through our forest is pretty surreal. We even got a video of another fisher checking out the forest feeders, so I'm hoping this means we'll have some decent fisher activity year-round. I remember reading a study on female fishers using den boxes. I'm a little late now, but I'll build some in the fall with trail cameras so we can monitor them. You may have noticed we had a decent amount of sightings around the forest feeders. In the last video, I set these up along with some of the feeders by the house to try to attract pine grosbeaks and evening grosbeaks. We had success with the pines, but came up short on the evenings. There's only a couple dozen possible bird species around in the winter here, so every new one we can add makes a big difference. This time, I thought I'd try for a bird that'll soon be leaving for their breeding grounds in the high Arctic, the snow bunting. I've never tried attracting snow buntings, and I haven't seen any at this new property, but in previous years I usually find them foraging on the side of the road around fields. These birds will often visit freshly cleared roads since the plows will sometimes kick up seeds that were buried under the snow, so I figured my best chance would be to set up as close to the road as possible and try to simulate that. The easiest thing to do was to use the driveway since we keep it cleared anyways, and once it was cleared I just put down some corn and small rocks. If there are snow buntings flying around, the yellow and the black really stand out against the snow, so I'm hoping it'll be enough to catch their attention. I also packed down a patch of snow on the side of the house and in the front, that way no matter where I am in the house I can keep an eye out for snow buntings. Last time, it took us over a month to get our most common species, the black-capped chickadee, to find the new forest feeding station. So by that estimate, we should get snow buntings here in the next 4 to 6 years. I'll keep you posted. In the meantime, I've been working on mapping out the location of every snag on the property. A snag is simply a dead standing tree or a dead standing limb on a living tree, and they're one of the most important habitat features you can have on your property. Dead trees fill with insects and fungi and mosses and lichens and provide an abundance of food for many wildlife. They're also critical for cavity nesting species to raise their young. In cities, snags are often considered safety hazards and quickly removed, but out here they can stand for decades and house many generations of cavity nesters. I spent a few days finding all of the suitable snags, which is any dead standing tree with a circumference of around 20 inches or more. This is the smallest size that our tiniest woodpecker, the downy woodpecker, will use to excavate a cavity. For our area, somewhere around 5 suitable snags per acre of forest is a minimum to really benefit the wildlife. And after counting all of ours, you might want to sit down for this, we only have 1.5 snags per acre. I know, it's a little low, but luckily there's an easy way to artificially bulk up this number, and that's by setting up nest boxes. This will instantly give some birds and small mammals new nesting sites around the property. Now, nest boxes alone don't quite provide the same value a dead tree does, but it's a starting point. Over the few days that I was building nest boxes, I noticed my snow bunting corn piles weren't really being used, besides seeing a few tracks from a blue jay now and again. But after 5 days, I had pretty much the exact same situation like last time when the pine grosbeak showed up. I was sitting at my desk when there were these white blurs dropping from the sky outside of my window. I looked down and just like that, we had snow buntings. They're not overly common backyard birds, so I wasn't sure what to expect, but they ended up finding these corn piles in a little under a week. Every day the group would get a little bigger. We started with a dozen and eventually they peaked around 50, which is not bad for such a simple setup. Initially I had the corn in a pile to make it more visible from the sky, but now that they found the food source, I've been spreading it out a little bit just to give them more space to forage. Winter flocks of snow buntings are known to bicker amongst themselves, so the extra space definitely helps. We've also been getting a group of around 40 pine siskins. Pine siskins have a ton of energy and they really liven up the feeders. At first glance, they might seem a little drab, but that's until you get a glimpse of the beautiful yellow edging on their feathers. Having larger groups of pine siskins and snow buntings visiting the yard helps to attract other curious birds from nearby, wondering what all the commotion is about. And luckily for me, that eventually caught the attention of one of my target species from last video, the evening grosbeak. This is the closest I've ever been to one, so I was able to really appreciate all the details. The males have a large ivory-colored beak, a bright yellow to a greenish-black gradient along the bodies, a yellow eye stripe, and white patches on the wings make this one of the most striking birds on the property. It's encouraging to see things slowly ramp up as we get closer and closer to spring. We're now finally getting the first days warm enough to start melting the snow, and on these warm days, while the birds come in by the dozens, there's another group of animals that are coming out by the millions. Snow fleas are traveling to the surface to feed on organic matter that's been trapped in the snow throughout the winter. This bizarre creature isn't really a flea, and it's actually not even considered an insect at all. They're classified as springtails, which get their name from a tail-like appendage called a furcula that springs them into the air and away from danger. What's interesting is how an animal smaller than a flake of black pepper can stay active while moving through the cold snow. Well, these snow fleas have a secret weapon coursing through their bodies in the form of an anti-freezing protein which prevents the water in their system from freezing. An ingenious way to not only survive in the cold, but to thrive in it. Snow fleas play a critical role in breaking down organic detritus and returning those nutrients back into the soil. So having this incredible anti-freezing adaptation allows them to get a head start on other species with similar roles. While the snow fleas were outside hard at work, I was inside finishing up the first batch of nest boxes. 25 boxes built so far. I want to put out around 50 for the first year, so I'm halfway done. Doesn't that look like a nice school photo? Right before they're about to graduate into the world. Awesome. Back here, this is the biggest one I've built so far for great crested flycatchers, 2-inch hole. Next size up, 1.5-inch hole for tree swallows and bluebirds. And then in the front here, I don't know how well you can see it, but they're all the exact same size boxes, but the holes are different. We have 1-inch holes for house wrens, 1 1/8 inch for both the chickadees, so boreal and black-capped chickadee, and then 1 1/4 for white-breasted, red-breasted nuthatch, and possibly flying squirrel. Flying squirrel will probably also use the eastern bluebird and tree swallow boxes. But yeah, that's, oh, ooh. I'm hoping to have many more of these in the springtime. This one woke up a little bit early. I did see one outside earlier today, and the sapsuckers are around, so they'll definitely find trees that sapsuckers have been tapping on, and they'll feed on the nectar. But I've already seen some out today, so I think this one has a better fate outside than it does inside the garage. Put this one up here. All right, buddy. Don't feel too bad for it. It might look a little cold, but it's actually around plus 20 today, so it'll be more than fine. All right, good luck, buddy. I've also been building these nesting platforms for robins and phoebes. These are 2 species we're pretty much guaranteed to have in the spring. There's even an old robin nest on top of the light of our garage, which is the inspiration for turning the carport into a nesting structure for barn swallows. Barn swallows build these cup nests made of mud, often on narrow ledges like under this bridge. I want to eventually build permanent barn swallow nesting towers, so I think this setup will be a nice practice run during the first year. I just cut up some 1x3s and 1x4s as the ledges. They really don't need much to build their nest on. The ledges are about 2.5 and 4 meters high and well protected from the elements. The pond is also right across from the garage, so I just need to make sure there's plenty of wet mud and clay for them in the spring, and the pairs will sometimes bring over 1,000 mouthfuls to shape their nest. Now it's just a waiting game for the snow to melt and the birds to start migrating through. I've been chipping away at the last of my winter tasks and getting ready for one of the best times of the year. And if our end of winter success is any indication of what's to come, it's looking like we'll have a very productive spring.